NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village, offering research-based arts, music, fitness, and lifelong learning programs at their assisted living and Alzheimer's care community in Westfield. armbrookvillage.com. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, celebrating British emancipation right here in its former colonies to show the folks here that maybe like the old country, they too could abolish slavery, which is exactly how Northampton went about it in the 19th century. And we'll learn more in today's Power of History segment with Professor Ousmane Power-Greene of Clark University.
And Mars has more than voltas.
That's a stretch for you.
I'm trying it out. But yes, discoveries on Mars, and they may just be a key to extraterrestrial entities. Mr. Universe Hampshire College's Salman Hameed talks to us about the rocks showing signs of life once removed.
But the sun has finally come out after a dreary morning.
Let's go hang out with folks getting everyone of every ability out to do some tree bathing.
You got a kid with CP, goes up into a high ropes course, gets up high in the air and is just, yeah, loving it. And now comes the captain of the football team who's scared of heights. You know? And a lot of bonds were formed. It put people on this kind of meeting ground that is just so beautiful and exciting. It really was an organizing mechanism for the disability movement.
Do you want me to go first, and then you can ask me questions about the terrain? It does get steep right at the last foot.
I will go backwards.
Okay.
This was one of the interesting design things, was how to work out accessible docks, because the water comes up and the water goes down.
Oh, yeah.
So we have these floating plates on the end that adjust.
We are rolling down a ramp off of Damon Road in Northampton with my dear friend, Christos Palamas, who is a advocate for accessibility. He, in his powered chair, is rolling backwards down this ramp where we see a myriad of kayaks.
I'm Karen Foster. I'm the executive director of All Out Adventures. We're a nonprofit based in Northampton that runs outdoor recreation programs for people of all ages with disabilities, seniors, and veterans throughout Massachusetts. We run about 200 programs a year-round.
Shout out to our colleague Nancy Cohen, who did a feature with you guys recently, I think, at the NEPM News Department.
She did a beautiful feature.
Chris is...
Oh, that was
How did it go, Chris, with the chair?
That was a dream. That was very smooth on the slope. I could have gone down forward. First time tested go backwards until you get the lay of the land.
Because if it's too steep, it's better to fall backward than fall forward, I'm imagining.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have tried to counterbalance you if I saw you going over.
A beautiful pile of kayaks we have here in reds and blues and greens.
How many people are here kayaking today?
We have about 15 people signed up. We have 4 paddleboarders signed up and 11 kayakers.
So All Out Adventures caters to people of differing abilities. What are some of the needs that are being met that might not be met by traditional kayaking or rowing organizations that All Out Adventures is able to meet today?
You know, we are really experienced and comfortable helping people with mobility concerns, any level of disability. So people who might not feel like they can sign up for the LL Bean paddling trip or go rent a kayak from EMS, whatever that reason is, we have a workaround and a way to make sure everybody who wants to participate is included.
Chris, you've been on the show before. We took a great tour of Park Hill Orchard in East Hampton, which has now an accessible cart so people can go with differing abilities through the orchard and view the art that's often on display there and pick some of the apples and more. A lot of the things that you've worked on in the history of your career, which has been instrumental in creating the Disability Act in Massachusetts and helping to create the Americans with Disability Act, you bear a lot of responsibility for your work and advocacy on this. But what you wanted to highlight today is that it's not just about wide sidewalks and ramps. It's so much more.
Yeah, it's nice to remind people that the ADA is about more than curb cuts. But, you know, I've also been remembering that these kind of outdoor adventure programs have had like a really important history in the disability movement. They've become an important meeting ground and organizing tool in the disability community, right? Because you get people together, working together, you get all of that comradeship. And very often that's been, particularly in terms of schools, such a key to promoting integration.
I'm curious about All Out Adventures and how it came to be in Northampton. Is it unique to this area, or is this something that happens all over the place?
Massachusetts is relatively unique. The Department of Conservation and Recreation, the state park system, has what's called the Universal Access Program. And that was really founded in response to the Americans with Disabilities Act as a way to provide meaningful access to the state parks. As Chris mentioned, beyond curb cuts, it's beyond accessible parking spaces and restrooms to the point of providing programmatic support so that people of all ages with disabilities can access the state parks. So All Out Adventures was founded in 2001 really to support the accessibility needs of the state parks. And since then, we've grown and we run programs in locations that are not state park system programs, but that's really how we got started. And still what we do is provide meaningful access to people to the outdoors.
How many programs in Western Mass do you run?
So we run about 200 programs a year throughout the state, and about 75% of those are in Western Mass.
That's a lot,
Yeah.
actually.
Way to go, us.
I'm tired.
But we now have accessible trails up and down the valley, right? More coming online every year and more still to be done. But then once you get the baseline of accessibility here to a dock, then you got to put the program on top. You got to bring in the latest adapted technology.
Can you tell us a little bit about the latest adaptive technology that All Out Adventures is bringing here to this dock in Northampton today?
Sure. One of my most favorite things is an accessible paddleboard. We have a stand-up paddleboard that has outriggers. They're pontoons that float behind to help provide stability, and it has a seat. So a paddleboarder who has a disability can sit on the seat, or we can turn the seat into a leaning prop, and it's got like arms to provide side stability. So we've had wheelchair users stand up paddleboard with the group. It's a really remarkable thing to be able to offer people and such a different perspective, to be able to be standing on the river and out with this group of people stand-up paddleboarding.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other programs that you do? And talk a little bit about how you have adapted them so people with different abilities can participate.
One of the things we're most known for is our cycling program that we run on Fridays in Hadley. And at that program, we have everything from recumbent trikes, which are 2 wheels in the front and 1 in the back, so we don't have to worry about balance. We can set them up for one-hand control, so people living with the impacts of a stroke or a brain injury, that often includes one-side weakness, can steer, brake, and shift with just one hand. We have hand cycles, so people can pedal with their arms. We have tandems, so people who don't have the executive function or the impulse control to stop at the stop signs or stay to the right can still go out and cycle with their loved ones. We have wheelchair tandems, so people who need to be passive in their riding can go out with their family, friends, caregivers. So it's probably the most accessible program that we run.
Who funds the program? Where is the money coming to get this adaptive technology? Because I think a lot of people feel very well intentioned with the organizations that they work with and work for and would love to make everything accessible, but it is and can be expensive.
It is expensive. Our ratios, our staff to participant ratios, we keep very low. And the equipment itself is expensive. I mean, some of the cycles we use cost $11,000. So our programmatic time, our time for the staff to be at a program is funded. We have a contract with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. We have one with the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, one with the Veterans Administration. But the rest of it, the equipment, the time to help outreach and help people understand what we have to offer, that's funded through private contributions and our 2 big fundraisers. So in September, we run an event called the Kayakathon, where we have a big flotilla, about 100 people, and we kayak from Sunderland to Northampton on the Connecticut River, and people raise money like a walkathon. And then in March, we do a polar plunge up at the DAR State Forest. We have had to cut through 8-10 inches of ice to expose the hole and do a big polar plunge, and all these community leaders jump in and help us. And those 2 events are really, really critical. And I should mention we sell and service recumbent trikes. So we sell the trikes we use in our programs, and the income from our trike shop helps to keep our programs free or low cost for people who participate.
Also there is a long history. This year is 50th anniversary for Stavros, starting back in '74.
Which you founded and named after your brother.
I did. Stavros is the Center for Independent Living that serves the 3 counties along the River Valley, celebrating its 50th anniversary in the autumn. But we also found this year records from looking at adaptive recreation programs from about 1978, and there was some tremendous innovation going on there in design, and it's like the lineage that you are in today. So one of the reasons that so much has changed over time is continuity, that people have been working at this, creatively. Hampshire College had an engineering and design program over there that focused on creating innovations around adaptive recreation. So, the Valley for a long, long time, I have always felt has been the leading area for innovation in law, but also in accessibility programs in the Commonwealth. I'm a little biased on it, but that's the way I see it.
Without being too modest, can you talk about your role in creating the Disabilities Act in Massachusetts that went on to inspire the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Well, I don't know that we inspired the Americans with Disabilities Act. What we were doing was the first round was around independent living. When Stavros got into the game in 1974, it was beginning the very first personal care assistance program. Monet, who brought me here today, is my personal care assistant.
Hey, Monet!
Keeps saving my life in many, many ways. Joe Comerford is promoting in the Senate of the Commonwealth today, important legislation that she's amended to deal with a lot of the issues over time that are still not resolved. Things like estate recovery, the things that you are not told when you sign up for Mass Health, that to some extent you may be compromising the ability of your family to inherit from your estate. Western Mass and continuity. We started early, the reforms, and people who came in to address the Belchertown State School. And then later there is a whole proud Western Mass history of leadership around disability rights.
Chris, you, as we mentioned earlier, came down this ramp that has a floating end of the ramp right here so that despite the fact they're on the river and the river levels rise and fall, you can easily get your chair down here. Karen, if Chris wanted to kayak or go on one of the boats here, what would be one of the options for Chris?
Oh, absolutely. Chris could either go in a tandem kayak with somebody paddling behind, or in a single kayak. We have a device called a paddle pivot. So, people who need assistance with holding the weight of a paddle, it can hold that and they can paddle with one arm or just with less fatigue. As far as getting into the kayak, we have different options. One thing I love is called a kayak chariot. It's like a transfer bench on balloon wheels, like if you're going to bring your cooler on the beach, like that style wheel. And we can attach the whole transfer bench and wheels to a kayak, help somebody transfer in. They can slide over on the transfer board into the kayak, and then we roll the whole device into the water, and then we unclip the balloon wheels, and then they're off floating.
I've been thinking of a double catamaran with a ramp like we have at the golf cart at Park Hill Orchard.
I love that, yeah.
That would be cool.
That would be cool. They could roll right into it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's about my pace these days. But it's lovely to be here. The upcoming event for the kayakathon, we may have a riverboat with a jazz band.
Oh, now that'd be something exciting on the Connecticut River. Feel a little New Orleans-y.
Yeah, I'm outrageously excited about this. We've worked with the Expandable Brass Band, and what we've done is we've booked the Lady B riverboat, which docks in South Hadley. So the kayakathon is our flotilla. 100 people are coming down the river. The Lady B, with the Expandable Brass Band on it, is going to motor upriver, find our flotilla, and then play us into the docks in Northampton.
That's where you'll find me with a deck of cards.
You have a riverboat captain feel, Chris.
Monet will be in one of the kayaks.
How many times have you done it?
This will probably be about the third time that I'll have done the kayakathon. I've done it the first 2 years, or 2 years ago, and I loved it, and then I did it last year, and I'm excited to do it.
Do you take non-kayaks for the kayakathon? I understand that it's in the name, but also I am really bad at those paddles.
You know what? So this is the 16th annual kayakathon. There were 2 years because of COVID that we didn't run it. So 18 years ago when we started this event, stand-up paddleboarding wasn't really a thing. So we called it the kayakathon, and then we have to let people know, bring your paddleboard, bring your canoe, all paddlecraft welcome.
We would say bring your pumpkin, but it's a little too early in the season.
But if you need one, we know a guy. He's been on the show,
We
too.
know a guy, too.
What keeps you involved in wanting to do this professionally, to personal care assistance, and why do you think it's something important?
I think that everybody needs help, and they all need personal care on some level, and I think people should get involved more, and I'm a person that's able to, and I get love and support from everybody that I've worked with, and the community around All Out Adventures and the PCA world in general is just so supportive, so welcoming to all people, all races, all creeds, all expressions of anything, and I just keep coming back because I love the people and I love the community, and more people definitely need to get involved.
We've known each other Monet's whole life.
That must make it extra special.
Yeah, Monet's mom was a sign language interpreter who was at one of the first dorms at UMass, which was called the Disability Dorm.
At
back in 1974. So Monet very naturally and is living with Judy and I for the summer, but we'll be back doing studies and then graduate studies at UMass.
Apologies if this seems pejorative, but what's the most awesome technology that you've seen working as a PCA that's adaptive for one of your clients?
I could definitely say the All Out Adventures, at least if we're talking about outdoor equipment. They have such an expansive and such a just diverse amount of equipment to be used for any single activities. And something that I've seen at least more in a personal space is an adaptable tub and more of that type of system to have a tub lift working up and down, which can have anybody kind of relax and not have to worry about standing up and taking a shower. And I love something like that. That's just so adaptive and so easily portable if you need it to be. So,
Chris Palamas, you live in Florence. Florence is part of Northampton, and we're on the docks. Off
We have to keep telling people that
I know,
Florence
sometimes
is part of Northampton, and they're like, what? And we're like, yeah.
We're on the docks off of Damon Road with All Out Adventures, who've sent an entourage of folks of all abilities kayaking down the river. But one of the things that has transpired in Northampton over the last year or so is you have a city councilor who uses a wheelchair. Our good friend Jeremy Makelmer-Dubbs, who's a rabble-rouser in the best way, in my opinion. And how has that helped to advocate for more accessibility in this particular city?
Well, I got to know Jeremy better last year because we were on the radio with you a year ago.
That's right.
And it's really developed, but Jeremy's whole political career. Jeremy began with his frustration around accessibility shutting down in wintertime.
Because people wouldn't appropriately shovel their sidewalks to make them wide enough for a wheelchair to pass through, business owners in downtown, etc.
That's right. Yep. Jeremy is using a power chair, and it's been fabulous seeing his interest in taking on that role as a city councilor really blossoming over this past year. We've had a number of fine advocates in municipal government in Northampton, but Jeremy's got a whole different set of riffs, including his music.
That's right. He's the star of a movie called Tallywhacker, which once it makes its way finally somewhere in Western Mass, we're definitely having him on as movie star / rock star / city council candidate.
It went to Boston. It's been in L.A.
It's got to go make the festival circuit, and then we can have it here.
Oh, it's on the festival circuit, and we haven't seen it here yet.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to it.
Yeah. Karen Foster, who's the executive director of All Out Adventures, who's brought us on this adventure here on the river today. We mentioned the kayakathon a couple times. If people want to participate, want to help raise money for the adaptive work that you're doing all across the state, how do they get involved?
They can go to our website, alloutadventures.org. And one thing they should know is that we're limited to 100 people in our flotilla. And the event last year filled up by the end of August. So people who are interested are going to want to sign up sooner than later.
I mean, otherwise, find a friend on that list and throw money.
Yeah, because that's the other way. You can support the people that are kayaking. Right?
If you're not one of the 100 people, you can always just open your wallet.
Everybody participating has a fundraising page that's linked to on our kayakathon page.
Chris, I'm starting to like these adaptive adventures that you're taking us on. We may need to make this a regular segment.
Yeah, well, I look forward to our rolling up and down some of the trails here in Western. What a better way to look at the communities along the river, because so many of the trails do have river views, and that includes your own hometown.
Well, let's roll.
You've been so good.
On the way, digging into the possible signs of life found on the surface of Mars with Mr. Universe.
And looking more closely at a celebration of Britain abolishing slavery at a time when we, as Americans, had not yet. Clark University professor Ousmane Power-Greene gets into the nuances of Northampton's Emancipation Day celebrations next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
It's time for our monthly segment, The Power of History, with history professor from Clark University in Worcester, Northampton's Ousmane Power-Greene. And we just, in June, got off of celebrating the newest federal holiday, Juneteenth. But you're going to take
It's
us...
always been a holiday.
It hasn't always been a federal holiday, which is what I said. But we are going to go back to 1843 to another celebration, and our story takes place in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, and first of all, thanks for having me on, and it's always great to have an opportunity to sort of bring these topics, to everybody, to help us really think about the role of history and Western Mass sort of in national history. For some of us who were listening, 1840s was a time, obviously, when the debate over slavery was still very present in our country. And one way people in Western Massachusetts, particularly in Northampton, also in Springfield, sought to force a conversation over emancipation was something they had called West Indian Emancipation Day, right? For those that don't know, the West Indies was the phrase used for, in this case, the British West Indies was the place where slavery ended in the 1830s, right? So in the Caribbean area now, they called it West Indian back then. And so, as I said, this was an opportunity for people to come together and really talk about the topic, which in the 1840s, as it always was up until the end of the Civil War, a very controversial topic.
So what was going on in Northampton in 1843, and how was West Indian Emancipation Day celebrated here in 1843?
So what makes it particularly interesting, I think, is that in Northampton, sort of being in Western Mass, it was a frequent site for the struggle against slavery, right? So people came through, they gave lectures, they gave speeches. But what's surprising, I think will be surprising to people now, is that there were Southerners who actually owned enslaved people who lived in Northampton during the summer times. And so as you can imagine, here it is, the 1840s, and you have a smallish group of people who consider themselves abolitionists or were against anti-slavery, trying to have public celebrations, against slavery would wrinkle feathers among the sort of elite in Northampton. And so by 1843, you have groups of people particularly organizing, I know people have come on to talk about the black abolitionist David Ruggles, who had arrived in Western Mass and was a part of these celebrations. Sometimes on July 4th was a common time when those who were against slavery would come and give lectures publicly. But then in August 1st, the opportunity to celebrate, look, the British emancipated slaves, as a way of saying to Americans, right, people in the United States, that, we should be promoting this as well because of British emancipation. And so by 1843, that was exactly what the goal was. It actually was a all-day event, if you could believe it. Kids playing, black and white children, it was reported playing, singers singing, and then enslaved people who had made their way to Western Mass, who were living, also gave testimony and talked about that experience.
Oh, so live slave testimony happening in Western Mass.
Which was controversial back then.
Because they didn't want to hear what the true stories that these people who were enslaved had to endure?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of different ways back then they were thinking about this and reporting in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, et cetera. There was one view that this was somewhat exploitative of enslaved people, sort of trouncing them out, having them publicly reveal themselves, and then sort of talk about their experience. So there was that sense. And of course, this was a big issue throughout the anti-slavery movement. How much do we want to jeopardize people's freedom, right? Because again, in 1843, these people could potentially be sent back to enslavement for the sake of the movement. Is the anti-slavery movement exploiting people who had fled slavery for the benefits of the movement? And so there were some who voiced that. Obviously, the other side was that they need to appeal to hearts and minds, right? And that people who lived in Northampton or the surrounding areas that came here, yes, we're talking about, understanding slavery as a Atlantic world phenomenon and how, slavery is now ended for the British Caribbean, and we need to celebrate that. But also we want to use it as an opportunity to recruit people to the cause. And what William Lloyd Garrison and other anti-slavery people learned quickly, particularly with Douglas's rise, Frederick Douglass, was that an actual enslaved person speaking about the experience is a has a major impact on people's consciousness. And so that was the reason why the somewhat debate over using actual people who were enslaved.
It's interesting that people would be worried about them. Not that we didn't know that people were being taken back into slavery who had emancipated themselves or been emancipated before the Fugitive Slave Act is made law. But it's interesting that in abolitionist circles, there's still like the idea that this is exploitative, even though there's emancipation involved.
Yeah. Well, and that's, the question of the means and ends of abolition, right? So, you could live in Western Massachusetts, in the 1830s and 40s and hear people talking about, talking against enslavement and talking about the contradictions and problems with slavery given our sort of Constitution, successfully argued by, shout out to, Mom Beck, quote unquote, as she went, Elizabeth Freeman, who successfully sued to end slavery, and judges agreed. You could say that, but it also was the controversial issue in the nation in the late 1830s. It was literally dividing Congress, really anti-slavery petitions. And so by the time you get to 1843, right, so, within the context of these petitions being sent in the mid-1830s, people are concerned that it disrupt the community by publicly antagonizing and pointing out these anti-slavery views. And, of course, that'll continue. So this was, again, I bring this up, and I think it's important for us to think about because we do have a major change, and that is in 1833-34, the Slavery and Abolition Act that was passed in the British world. In 1840 is a different world than it was, before that in 1830s. Now American abolitionists can say, look, the British did it, and there's, really they use great justifications for ending enslavement. We need to think about those same things.
You mentioned it was an all-day celebration in Northampton. Is it in the Florence area of Northampton that we think about where the Sojourner Truth statue is, where the David Ruggles Center is, where these big names are still memorialized to this day?
Yeah. In that same segment, which of course will be called Florence a little later, so that is still part of Northampton. But that area was the site for this association that was free thinking and anti-slavery by sentiment. And so that would be the place, the physical location where they would have this celebration and people would sort of congregate. But it's important to note, and this is the reason why we keep sort of coming back to holidays or celebrations, is that these are sort of formal opportunities to be able to bring people together for a common cause. I mean, obviously, July 4th, right, is like the big one for many people, but other groups of people have always used parades, celebrations, as a way to express or perform an understanding of the values and issues that are part of the social issue that particularly people can't see, right? So you're going to have songs, you have various sort of types of celebrations as a way to bring into the public sphere the issues and topics at hand. And I think, and it seems to me, from the reporting in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, which existed back then, it seems to be a sort of festive event, which of course is in contrast to earlier efforts. So that's, in August, so early August 1st is what they call it, August 1st celebrations. But just that same year, July 4th, when William Lloyd Garrison, the controversial abolitionist, comes to speak in downtown Northampton, more downtown, he's heckled. So I think some people may have thrown rocks at him, but they certainly heckled him and sort of tried to destroy the opportunity to at least engage in using the 4th of July to speak his anti-slavery views, which, again, people did not find to be, some people didn't think that it was appropriate to use 4th of July for that reason.
Soon, aliens, maybe, sort of. Well, at least clues that might lead to signs of life on the fourth rock from the sun with Hampshire College's Salman Hameed.
But next, how Northampton residents felt about the call towards abolition that the town's Emancipation Day celebration hoped to spark. More of the Power of History with Ousmane Power-Greene.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
We're speaking with Dr. Ousmane Power-Greene, our regular segment, The Power of History, and we're talking about the celebrations in 1843 of West Indian emancipation that predate Juneteenth and some of the other celebrations that we've heard a lot about historically and currently.
Is there in the articles in the Gazette any differentiation between the public that lives in Northampton year round, like the people that are basically like locals, and the people who have come up from the South with their, let's say, entourage for the summer, in articles like this looking at divisive speeches of this nature?
So the main way is through letters to the editor. So letters to the editor would be a place you'd be able to find a sort of somewhat of a critique either way. But most of the time, and this is why I want to bring it up to people, is that most of the time it was critical of the quote unquote rabble rousers who are attempting to intentionally rile up a population, even if they see it as celebration, even if they see it as an opportunity on July 4th. So ironically, most of the voice was critical of that. And the sort of prominent Mariah Childs writes about that in her work, about the sort of coming to Northampton, sort of realizing that this population of the sort of elite who respected her in terms of her work as a writer also found the sentiments around anti-slavery to be, a little much, and the things that should be spoken about and dealt with legally, maybe politically, but definitely not. It could be very divisive.
Interesting parallels thinking about being on Center Street in Northampton during Black Lives Matter protests.
Absolutely.
That the statement of Black Lives Matter seems like the most basic, small modicum of dignity, but how that became so controversial even in our contemporary era, even right around the corner from where William Lloyd Garrison was getting stoned by talking about anti-slavery 150 years before.
That's because if we talk about it in public, we ruin a Sunday, and who wants that?
Yeah, and I mean, no, that's really seems what it's like. It's like it just doesn't feel
it's
proper.
Like we were having such a lovely time, and here you come talking all of your abolition talk again.
And so the parallels are not lost, and we've come far, but maybe not as far as we'd like to think we've come.
Yeah, and particularly, I just want to remind everyone that we often hear of individuals associated with, say, the Underground Railroad, or individuals associated with movements against slavery or any social justice cause. But I do think it's important to see the way in which celebrations like this actually become places where people become engaged, similar to what you had mentioned in terms of protests, but a sort of formal way outside of a protest demonstration where people can come together and feel that sort of spirit in the sort of second great awakening way. Sort of, for those, those who aren't aware, so this religious revival that had been a major part of New England of really trying to get people beyond just their heads and to actually feel the spirit, or in this case, feel an understanding of the possibility of ending an oppressive institution. That's what I think is particularly interesting about studying history, is we can look back, 100 years, 150 years, and see very similar debates and issues, and also very similar ways of expressing ourselves around topics that we're passionate about.
Is there documentation of Emancipation Day happening in Northampton after the 1840s, or does it hit like a peak in order to drive up interest in the abolitionist movement and then kind of taper off?
So there's a major book called Right to August by Jerry Ritchie, and that looks broadly nationally. I think, as I always say to my students, that sounds like a great dissertation topic. That's the way professors, everybody on the radio answer questions they don't know. That's a great topic for you to research and write about.
That's an expensive way to find out the answer to my question.
Yeah. Exactly. I do think that it would be fantastic for somebody to sit down and and maybe someone listening right now has done this work, so please email me. But, to really sit down and chart it, and you probably do it by just following the local newspapers and following the anti-slavery press. William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator has been digitized, and through digitization, it's more efficient to sort of look for you could keyword search everybody, West Indian Emancipation or August 1st, and then see what pops up, because those are the exact sort of things that'll be published in anti-slavery newspapers.
Dr. Ousmane Power-Greene, August 1st may be West Indies Emancipation Day.
Yep.
But August is the Sunday of summer, which somebody told me the other day when we were at Monsoon Coffee, and I was like, this is the saddest thing I've ever heard. I wish I didn't know this, but now I've said it to you, which means
it's birthday month.
It's Khalees's birthday month.
Okay.
No, it's my whole family's birthday month.
But it also means the end of your summer before you're going to go back to Clark. Although you have been teaching throughout the summer, what are the classes you're teaching at Clark this coming semester?
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited, and I've been excited to energize my students because I'm actually teaching a history of hip hop course. I know.
We got another segment for next month.
I know, right? Well, for my students, some of whom were born in 2004.
Oh, who didn't get the early years.
I joke that teaching a history of hip hop course for them is like me taking a course on the history of civil rights movement, because I was born in 73, everybody. And so, for them, they want to hear about the early days. And And so, yeah, I've been thinking, that's actually, you talk about the Sunday of summer. I do need to face the music, so to speak.
Hip-hop music.
on hip-hop music on August 1st and begin to say, all right, and make hard choice on what we're teaching. Because as those who are listening that have been energized with the 50th anniversary, as it turns out, we're looking at 4 courses, like the history of fashion, the history of b-boying and breakdancing, the history of rap, the history of graffiti and art, and of DJing, and absolutely, and there's a place history, right? So those who are from Detroit, they want to hear themselves represented. Those from LA. So it's an overwhelming class, which I'm excited to take on, but mostly because it's one of the first classes that I've had so many students tap me and say, "Oh, Professor, I heard you're teaching it. I signed up for it," because I'm like, the expectations are high. And
you can always make a part 1 and a part 2 for this hip hop.
Yeah, 200 level hip hop.
We're entering 5th era hip hop.
I know, right?
Like that seems like a lot to put in one semester.
Good Lord. Yeah. Well, the role of the role in rap music of references and samples of historic figures, maybe Malcolm X being the most prominent, for those of us in the 80s, KRS-One, to drops by Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. There's a whole class there looking at the role of hip-hop in terms of history, because I know myself personally in the 80s, seeing Marcus Garvey, seeing these images of figures during rap videos was for me definitely a pathway for me to start getting more into history as a high school student. So maybe there's some others of us out there who first got our lesson of African-American history via hip-hop, be Public Enemy and KRS-One.
Public Enemy's coming to the Big E.
Latifah.
You got them to come in and teach a guest lesson at your class.
Lord.
I know.
If we only had the funding. Former Clark alums, send some funds our way so we can bring Public Enemy to come to class.
Ousmane, Power-Greene, it's always a delight talking with you. I love this segment, The Power of History, and I can't wait to hear what you bring to us on the show next month.
Yes, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Let's go to space now.
Mr. Universe is about to explain how signs of life on rocks on Mars might eventually change that to show that there's life.
There are rocks on Mars.
Yes, you're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
At the Amherst kitchen table of Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe, reading the New York Times Sunday edition as I do every weekend, and I was grabbed by a great headline. The digital version headline is not as good, but I'll read that verbatim. NASA did not say it found life on Mars, but it's very excited about this rock. I believe the print version headline said something more akin to, and I like this better, life on Mars? ? Not exactly, but signs of life on Mars. So what is happening with this rock that our Perseverance rover is doing on Mars right now?
That's right. So this is potentially a big news, but we have to be very careful. And Perseverance rover that is on Mars, that landed over there, I think in 2021. It is at one of the most interesting places on Mars that you can land on. I mean, there are other places also if humans are there. But this is a Jezero crater, so where we know that a few billion years ago, this place was filled up with water. And so there was standing water for a while. This Perseverance rover has been roving, and right now it is at a place which is sort of like a river delta. And so it has been looking at rocks and other things. But just now, on July 21st, they found a rock which astronomers think that that's the most interesting rock it has found so far. They've been very careful. One of the reasons is that this has not been peer-reviewed. But they wanted to make the announcement. And the reason for that was the team that has been analyzing this was presenting at a conference. And so that news would have come out anyway. And so NASA did this press release. And I actually like it that they have been very careful in saying what they have found. And so signs of life, I think is an accurate statement. And there is a caveat to that because the reason why there is a caveat is because in 1996, astronomers found there was this rock. We have talked about it before, I think. It was called ALH 84001. And NASA had a press conference. This was a rock from Mars. So it was a Martian meteoroid. And the press conference in 96 basically made a claim that it had signatures of past life or signs of fossils of life on Mars. Now, that was a big statement.
Because it would have been the first time there was confirmed life anywhere else in the universe besides this planet.
That's right. And at the press conference, they were being careful. This was in 1996, in which they said, well, of course, there are going to be tests. Of course, there are going to be other people that are going to be challenging it, so on and so forth. But the headline was that astronomers may have found fossilized life forms from Mars. And at that time, President Bill Clinton did a press conference saying that, which ended up showing up in the movie Contact, side note. But this was, at the time, huge. And I was in graduate school. I remember we all gathered together in the conference room to watch the news because it was considered as, well, while we were watching it, listening to that, this is a moment we may remember our entire lives. Well, it turned out that those signatures that was in that Martian meteoroid may have been chemical and not biological, or geological, not biological. So now most astronomers, almost all, not all of them, but most believe that that was not a sign of fossilized life.
But interesting enough that there are still people that do.
That is correct, but not all. And again, so this goes back to this question that this claim of even evidence of past life on another planet, past fossilized life on Mars, it's such a huge claim that you have to be absolutely sure to make it. And again, from Carl Sagan, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so this press conference, or this signs of life, I think is coming from that perspective, learning lessons from the 1990s announcement of the Martian meteoroid ALH 84001. And so this time they are saying, okay, this is very interesting, but we're not saying the L word. We're not saying that it's life, but it looks like it may have signs of potential fossilized life form.
Now, the problem is the rock is still on Mars. They want to get this rock back so that they can look at it. That's going to be a huge cost. And I think they're also kind of putting the word out there like, hey, if anybody's got good ideas how we can get this rock back cheaper, let's do that.
The timing, in some sense, is fortuitous, or maybe if you are of the conspiratorial mind, like, too coincidence, like, in that sense that just recently NASA announced that there was a plan, Mars sample return, and that was for 2030, that there's going to be a mission that's going to go. This particular rover, Perseverance rover, is collecting rock samples from this area and leaving them to be picked up, including from this particular rock. And of course, it has instruments over there. But what you can do from instruments here on Earth is incomparable, because you can actually use some of the biggest instruments here. You can really analyze it much more carefully. So it is a big deal to bring samples back from Mars, which no one has so far done. But the mission right now is slated to cost about $11 billion. And the cost was still spiraling up. So I think earlier this year, NASA has put it on on a back burner, and they said, well, maybe it is being canceled. Maybe somebody else, for private companies, if they want to take some cheaper approach. So they have made a call, that, hey, if somebody can come up with better method, but we would like to bring those samples back. And you can imagine, so right now Perseverance rover is taking these samples, and we don't know how they are going to come back if there is another spacecraft that goes and collects them. It has to get to different places, or is the Perseverance rover going to collect them back and put it in one place, and then the spacecraft has to, remember, even just to land on Mars is hard, and there you would have to collect those samples, take off from there, and then come back to Mars, something that no one or no country or no company has ever done before. Mm-hmm. So that's where the challenge lies, but it would be really cool to analyze it. And as a caveat, we always mention that, China does have a plan of Mars sample return, I think, in the early 2030s. So maybe that may be a motivation for that. Nevertheless, this particular rock looks like a really fascinating sample.
What are the signs of life in this rock that everybody's excited about?
So there are a couple
It's not
of
like a
things.
Martian face. It's not like a little body. We're talking microbial life here. We're talking like the most basic life. And the fact that this was a river delta at one point with active water. Everywhere there's water on this planet, there is life. So this is why this is a great place to look to see if there ever was life.
Right, and this is, again, a comparison, a contrast to people who make claims about UFOs.
Yeah.
Right, oh, there, I saw something, it must be flying saucer, or I cannot explain this something. This is a great example of how careful you should be if you are doing good science. And so in this particular case, first of all, in this rock, they found organic compounds. Organic compounds are carbon-based compounds that have carbon atoms in it. They are the building blocks of life, so that is great. But organic compounds can also be from non-biological processes, so that by in itself doesn't make it interesting. However, there has been very few signatures of organic compounds on Mars. So this is a confirmed detection that there are organic compounds there, and that's a big deal. Second thing they found in this particular rock, there are these lines of calcium sulfate. And this is a mineral deposit which is usually deposited by flowing water. Even though we talked about a river delta, you still want to be sure that liquid water was there, because liquid water is key, as we understand it, to life. So this particular rock, it looks like, was definitely underwater, or there was flowing water around it. So that was the second piece that was important. But the third one is that it also had iron in it. So it's hematite, which is iron, which gives Mars the color red, for example. But they found these, what they're calling leopard spots. And these are small off-white splotches. And around that, there are black rings. The question is that, well, they had not been found before. And that is really piquing interest of scientists, because these black rings contains iron phosphate. Now, that is okay, but on Earth, this is a chemical reaction that creates these leopard spots that can provide energy to microbes. And so here on Earth, these are similar to Red Canyon, for example, outside of Las Vegas. You have similar red rocks in there, and you have similar features. On Earth, when you see those are usually the signatures that microbes have been there. They actually use this iron for energy source. So if you are looking for comparisons on Earth, they usually mean that there are microbes around, there are microbes were there. And so on Mars, you see these splotches, you see these leopard spots, what they are calling, of iron phosphate. But is it life? Well, we don't know. We are not seeing actual fossils or microbial fossils over there, whatever that would mean, but we are seeing indirect signatures of potential life, that a microbial life that existed on Mars perhaps a billion or a few billion years ago, when there was water there.
Signs of life.
And that is where, in some sense, it becomes important if we could bring samples back, because this would be a pristine sample, unlike Martian rocks that can fall on Earth. And there are, I think, a couple of dozen of these Martian meteoroids here. Those have been in space for a long time. They go through our atmosphere, and then, unlike ALH 84001, which was really interesting because that particular rock was lodged a few billion years ago when Mars had liquid water on it, most rocks from Mars do not. So this particular rock, for example, that Perseverance rover has found, this is an interesting one if we can bring it back. Now, this may also be a starting point, because you may find more rocks like that because you are in this interesting area, and they may start finding more things. This is really exciting. I think if you read between the lines of the press release has been very carefully written, and I think that is great. Because if you are going to claim that there was ever life on Mars. And again, just as a context, so far, the only place in the universe where we are 100% sure there is life is the Earth. To make a claim that there is life elsewhere, or there was life elsewhere, that actually is a huge, huge thing, because at least for Mars, there will still be a question whether that life arose independently of the Earth, or potentially it arose on one of the planets, and because we exchange rocks, perhaps it went from one planet to another. But that would be a huge deal. And if we find signs of life, what kind of life there is on Mars? Is it based on a similar kind of biology that is on Earth? Or it's different? That would be very exciting. But those claims are so huge that you have to be careful. If one lesson you take from this, when you hear about UFOs, when you hear about other claims, just look at this story of the way scientists who would love to believe that there is life, who want to believe there is life, how careful they tend to be, because we don't want to fool ourselves. It doesn't do anybody any good if we just want to believe in it without sufficient evidence.
I like when you sing it. Thursday on the Fabulous 413, Pan-American Stories in the Truest Sense at Alina's in Hadley, and with live music from Los Gaiteros de San Jacinto.
And we'll have our fill of truly American story and the delicious food there at Alina's.
Plus, if you've got a question for our weekly chat with Rep. Jim McGovern, email the fab413@nepm.org. We'll talk with him tomorrow.
Here is some of the music of the band that we'll hear coming to play Cumbia live in the studio tomorrow.
And who you can see tomorrow night at Marigold Theater in East Hampton.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We will see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.